of my favorite things about
live streaming is
exactly.
on.
I love how Jitsi announces that. That's to me such an awesome feature of you can't like secretly be recording somebody without, without that. You can't get around that sound. So, okay, we are live on YouTube. I've got a little chat window over here just in case anybody shows up. Not expecting anybody to, but just in case. And hey, BB, who's BB?
Oh, that looks like Cole's brother.
Yeah, I'm Cole's younger brother.
Nice. All right.
Yeah, I'm learning coding in school, and Cole said I should hop in and just listen to you guys and kind of see what you guys are talking about.
Man, what's your first name?
Braden.
Braden. Dude, and what school are you at right now?
Westminster College in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Welcome. Hey, thanks for stopping by tonight. This is great.
Of course.
Cool. So this is a unique sort of like intro to development course. And the way we're thinking about this is what we really want to do is highlight some of the big picture stuff in a way that provides people with context. Okay. In a 1 hour live course, you can't go too deep into the details of how the tech works, right? That's for all of us to do on our own time, to dive into the documentation and to become fluent in all those details. What we can do in an hour, and I think what's really important to do in a social setting, is talk about how these pieces fit together and why they're valuable, right? And like I said last week, one of the things I struggle with most when I'm reading documentation is I really have a hard time knowing what the most important points are. I'm reading through, I'm like, okay, well, it's telling me this information, but what are the parts that a real developer actually uses all the time? Like, what are the things that I'm actually going to be using tomorrow, and what's just kind of overhead and fat in this documentation? So I want to try to cover things that are the essential stuff that's going to relate no matter what context you're working within. So I'm going to share my screen here. Oh, there it is. Okay. Let's move. Let's see. Okay. All right. So first of all, you got my screen sharing now?
Yep.
Okay, good. This is the talk that happened earlier today on YouTube, the metadata workshop. So anybody who wants to go on a deeper dive, this is so worth checking out. In the IOHK playlist, there's also these 2 shorter videos just giving some information, metadata on the chain and posting metadata. So explore this stuff. What we're going to do tonight is play around with a couple of metadata queries via some Dandelion APIs built by Roberto, who we've got sitting right here. Before we do that, oh shoot, I have this in. Sorry, I have a little bit of tab overload going here, but let me see if I can find the one I was looking for. I'll search for it this way. Nope. Had the Lyft wallet repository open. Now I got to find that link again. Roberto, do you remember Kyle's GitHub handle?
Yeah, should be.
I'm scrolling back through the Discord from today. There was a lot of good stuff.
It's nothing alike.
Nothing alike. One word?
Yep. I can
Let's try this.
throw the URL. to the chat.
Thanks.
That should work.
There it is. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Had this open, but I don't know what I did with it. All right. So we're talking to Kyle Johns here, Nothing Alike on GitHub. He's building a wallet using some of the Dandelion APIs, but also integrating so much other great stuff. So this is coming down the pike. All I wanted to show everybody who took a look at last week's course is, we started working in React, and I just want to show you, if I go into our project from last week, every React project has this SRC folder, this public folder. Inside of SRC is a lot of where you do your building, right? These are the source files for your project. And in Kyle's Lyft wallet, you see the very same folders here, okay? He's using VS Code. He's got this source folder here that has a bunch of files inside. Now he's building this on Vue.js instead of React.js. The reason I'm showing you this is that design pattern of having a source folder is common across frameworks, okay? So that's just something you're gonna see all the time. Instead of having app.js like we have, he's got an app.vue file, right? But even with just last week's session in mind, what I hope is that it feels a little bit easier to go in and read a file like this one and to say, oh, okay, I can see how this file is different from React. I can see these custom looking tags here. I guess that's something that has to do with how Vue works. And then you can go through here and just look for what makes sense and what doesn't yet. And this can be a really nice way for defining what your next steps are when you're trying to learn, right? I see an import statement that looks very similar to the ones we were using last week, right? But then I see a lot of like framework specific stuff that looks less familiar, okay? A couple of JavaScript files where you're going to see a lot of imports, right? He's using Axios to handle the Dandelion APIs, just like we began to do last week, okay? So that's a common project no matter what framework you're using. Any questions about that part? All right. So I just wanted everybody to know that this is happening and just give you a little bit of a model for, what you can do when you're looking at somebody else's project on GitHub. All right. We're going to, like I said, use some API calls in a minute. But before we do, let's just take a look at how far we got last week. So I don't know if anybody had time to play around with Bootstrap. Ryan, did you hear from anybody about messing around with that?
I didn't. I started looking at it. I played with some API calls, but me and Dan were going to sit down sometime this week as well and just kind of play around.
Cool. I'm going to save styling for next week. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's look at Bootstrap together. That's, React handles a lot of the logic of the web app. And then Bootstrap is one really, accessible toolkit for making it look good. It's certainly not the only one. It's not even the best one, but it is easy enough to start using. All right, so if I go run npm start here in our project, this is how far we got last week. There's no styling here yet. We're drawing some information from a data JSON file, and then we made an API call via Dandelion to make this. This was a metadata message here. And remember, when I load the page, we made the word loading show up for 3 full seconds because we chose to put 300 milliseconds right here. So it's totally artificial, but this is how you kind of create the illusion of interactivity, right? Is by using timeouts in, well-placed spots. So if I change this, I'm going to change this to 500 because I don't want to wait on that anymore. And now I'll have a half second of loading, and then the information comes up. We used Axios, right? We imported this. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry, I thought somebody had a question. We imported Axios, and we're using that to kind of handle our GET request to Dandelion. We also have a separate file with just some really basic JSON in it, and we talked about how to take this information and pass it into our app.js file via this import statement, and then how to map it to a list, okay? We haven't yet really used React for some of what it's best for, which is separating concerns. So that's what I want to start with tonight, by breaking this single app file up into its component parts. And that's just best practice anytime you're creating any sort of program, is not to let one single file get bloated, but to break it apart into parts so that you can always go and just work on one thing, okay? So to do this, there's a few ways we can go about it, but I'm just going to start really simple, okay? Let's look at just this header section right here, okay? We're going to say, okay, this is the site headline. It can be formatted in any number of ways. The information, it comes from that JSON file, but it could just as well be written in here, right? Hard coded in. But really, what I want to do as a developer is be able to handle the site title separately from everything else. So if I want to style that part, I can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece out, and I'm going to move it up here, okay? And you know what? No, I'm just going to go straight to making separate files. Sorry. Let me do this. In my source folder, I'm going to start a new file, and I'm going to call this like site title.js. It has to be capitalized in React. Okay. This is site title. I have a plugin here that gets me some boilerplate really quickly. Okay. But what you can see is it takes the name of this component from the name of the file, and it's going to export something called site title that I can then use. All I'm going to do with this is grab these two lines right here, and I'm going to put them here like this. Okay. So now just this little piece of HTML is isolated in this separate file called site title. And if the whole import piece made sense last week, you can see how now we're going to be able to import this component into here so that we can use it. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to import site title. You see VS Code knows I have that made somewhere else now. From quotes, the dot means the current folder I'm in, this folder, and then it automatically shows me what my choices are for what to import. Okay. Now just kind of the details of this reference to site title right here, the second one, this is a reference to the name of the actual file. Whereas this first reference, what we're importing, is actually a reference to the name of the function inside of the file, okay? Which is what we're exporting. The reason we're able to import site title here is because we are exporting it here. Let's save this. And then let's save this. And can anybody already see why this is going to break? Ryan, I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you see why this failed to compile here?
Definitions.
All right. And so what are we not defining, right? You can see how we're using this variable ideas. So, right, this message here says the problem is in the file called site title, right? Where is the problem? It's on lines 6 and on 7. And the problem on lines 6 and 7 is that ideas is not defined. Okay. The quick fix to this is, oh, dang, of course, we forgot to import the ideas from here. And if I grab this import line again and I put it here, now I should be fine referencing ideas. Okay. Now I still get a warning because now in app.js, oh, I defined site title. Yeah, dang, I imported this thing, but then I never actually used it. And if I go check my site, of course, what I'm going to see is those headers are no longer there, right? So now all I have to do, and this is also represented by this, this is not a spelling error when, like in a word processor, but VS Code gives you this squiggly line here to represent, okay, you created this thing, but then you never used it, right? So one way to get rid of this warning is just not to import anything that I'm not using, right? And that's good housekeeping when you're done creating something. But of course, the whole reason I made this is because I do want to use it. And the way I can use that, this is called a JSX tag, is I can write the name of what I imported here with a kind of a closing bracket all in one. Okay, so this is one single JSX element. It says JSX attribute, right? It looks similar to an HTML element, but it's customized to this thing I built. And now when I save this, of course, I have no more warnings and we're right back to where we started, right? So it feels like I just did a whole bunch of work to make no changes appear on the page, but this is all in the background, right? And this is just best practice to separate these concerns. So I'm going to do that again really quickly. I'm just going to do the same thing with the actual data here, okay? And let's just remove this. I'm going to make a tag, let's just call it like idea list, okay? Close that. Now that's not made yet. So now I'm getting an error because I'm calling something that's not imported and doesn't even exist, right? And so obviously you can imagine if I save my work, it's going to fail to compile because idea list is not defined. I can then import idea list from here. Okay. But of course, when I save this, it's not going to compile because it can't find this file because it doesn't yet exist. And so my final step is to now make that file, make sure I give it the name that I said it was going to have up there, .js. Use this built-in. I have a plugin installed once again in VS Code so that when I type RFCE and enter, I get this boilerplate. And then I'm just going to paste what I previously cut from the other file. And because I'm anal, I'm just going to make sure these tabs are all set. I got to work on making those, making those paste better. All right. Now if I save this, okay, once again, ideas is not defined. Good. So I'm going to want to bring that over. Notice that I'm no longer going to need it here in app.js, right? Because I'm no longer calling it. So I can actually delete it from here. And I can bring it in here instead. Now I still have some errors. Let's see what those errors are. Loading and some data are not defined, okay? So this is really the interesting part. All of this logic here that I used to post this data, this absolutely does not belong in my app.js file, okay? App.js should be really clean and neat. When you look at this app.js file, honestly, in React, it should almost read like a table of contents, okay? Somebody should just be able to come into this file and look at my list of imports and look at the list of modules I'm putting on the page and say, okay, I can see at a high level what the components of this app are, and then I can poke around in the sub files of this project to figure out what site title and idea list are and how all those things work, okay? So the real value, right? This part, when I showed you this part initially, this was pretty contrived just to separate the title, okay? Just because I wanted to give you the basics of the idea. But the absolutely critical part is all of this logic here that I was running. This definitely wants to go in a separate component, okay? And once you understand this piece about components, right? I have a website. All of us are familiar with looking at websites. You can probably imagine when you look at somebody else's what the different components are, and you can think about how those fit together, right? When you're making your own plan for a web app, same thing. Think about the pieces you need to build. Think about, you know, what this list of things will be, and then one by one attack them, right? Build these things one by one. So if I save this, it's still not going to compile because I haven't imported these things I'm using, okay? So use state and use effect. Those are React hooks. And then Axios, we already talked about, helps me out with my API calls. So yeah, notice that in app, these two lines are giving me that warning that these things are all not used. And these two lines are kind of grayed out right here, right? To show that they're not doing anything anymore. So I've made these two lines irrelevant. I can get rid of them here. And I can put them, whoops, just close that by accident. Let's open that again. And I can put them here instead. Let's save that. We do have some warnings, but how's our page look? Okay, use state is not defined. Look for that for just a second. All right, oops, and I didn't save this file. Okay, I gotta save this. There we go. All right, so sometimes before I got too deep in trying to troubleshoot what was going on there, I should have just made sure that I had saved all my files, okay? Because the changes I made to app hadn't yet been made. Now we're compiling successfully. Now the site looks exactly like it looked a half hour ago, but it's built on a stronger foundation now, okay? And look at how elegant this app.js file is. There's barely anything in it, okay? And in fact, because I went into app.css last week, oh, this still has app header. These are here. Oh, I stopped importing. Okay, just to show you, just to remind you this, we stopped importing app.css. So if I bring that back, I go back to this kind of React, create React app styling, okay? But the reason I got rid of this last week is because a centered list looks stupid. So I just turned that off. And so what I'm also going to do actually is I'm going to just get rid of the app header. And I'm going to get rid of this class for now, just to make this file as bare bones as it can possibly be. And technically, I could just delete app.css. I'm going to leave it here for future use, just in case we want to mess with it later on. Okay. But if I was certain that I didn't want to use it again, I could get rid of that. All right. So that's how you separate concerns in React. Who's got questions? All right. Should we keep going?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's do the fun part. So now when we go into idea list, this is where we can actually just focus on the thing we're doing here, which is messing around with some API calls. Okay. And actually, really what I should do is this. Yeah, let me do this too, because it's best practice. Idea list is separate from this call. So let me make one more file. Oops. So again, in source, a new file. Let's call this one a metadata call, metadata request. That's not really a request. Let's just call it, you know what, let's just call it, metadata call, whatever. Doesn't matter that much. Once again, I'm making a functional component, and I'm going to grab the parts of this file that are, we're going to leave the data here, but everything with the external API call, we're going to move over here. So that's this piece. And then all of this logic right here does not apply to just looking at our local data that's in the ideas.json file, right? So now this is actually an even simpler component. And we'll style this next week, okay? But for now, I'm going to leave that alone and close that, because what we really want to focus on tonight is this piece right here. I save this, everything. Okay, I made the file, but I didn't yet import that file. Metadata call from, there it is, autocomplete. And that's going to go here. Again, I'm leaning on autocomplete. Okay, so now again, I'm back to where I started. Good. And just for fun, this is, it's not exactly best practice to use inline styles in React, but just for fun right now, let's do this. I forget if I need the semicolon. Okay, good. So yeah, so I can style components separately, right? I'm not going to try to make this a beautiful color right here. I just want to show that this can happen within the individual components. There's actually other extensions you can install that make this part a lot easier, or this can be done in a CSS file that's separate, okay? But just as a reminder to ourselves what we're working on, I've got that highlighted blue now. Actually, blue looks too much like a link. Let's make it green. All right, yeah, that looks good. And then, we'll do a little bit more with styling next week. All right, so let's go back to the API documentation. So at gimballabs.com, we've got a few different open source APIs up here so far. This site right here is built on React and Bootstrap. Juan, what's up? Okay.
I just want to ask you why React doesn't use a style, or is not appropriate, or is not a common to use a style. That was line 22 on the previous slides.
That's a great question. I don't know the exact reasoning why it's not the best. I think it's just a matter of, like, when it comes to separating concerns, I think it's just a lot less elegant once you start having all these styles inserted. But you always have this tool, right? If you just need to do something quickly, you can do it, right? But ideally, if you're trying to build a bigger app, you don't want to be searching. You don't want to be like bouncing around. What you want to do is kind of have a consistent style that you're feeding through via a class. Okay.
Oh, I see. So that means that it has a different, different group of class just to take care of styling, instead of just putting one at a time. Or
exactly.
Is that what you mean?
Because ideally, exactly, right? Like I don't want to do this more than once across my whole site.
Got it.
Right. And so anything I'm going to be repeating, I'm going to want to make that a class here in my CSS file so that I can just call that class whenever I want to apply it.
Oh, okay. Good. Thank you.
One of my favorite extensions is called Styled Components, because it allows you to basically build custom HTML components with custom styles in a file. So in those cases where custom styling is necessary, it doesn't have to live here inside the tag, but can be separated down here at the bottom of the file and then applied. Okay. So yeah, that's something we'll definitely take a look at next week. Okay.
Great. Thanks.
Oh yeah, you bet. No, good question. All right, so we've got some APIs up and running. I'm still learning how to use some of these, and Roberto is still releasing them as we go. They're already starting to be used. So like I said, Kyle is using some of these to create Lyft Wallet here. We're just going to take a look at this REST API down here, the same one that we took a look at last week. And all we did is we took a look at this example that Roberto posted. We saw that we can change the number right here, right, to access any metadata that's ever been posted to the chain, and we can render it to our app. And that's exactly what happened here. And I knew approximately what the number of this transaction was, and I had to like guess and check a few times. So I was sitting here going 2800, 2801, 2802, and I was just looking at what it rendered each time until I found the one I was looking for. Okay. Now you'll see in the documentation, obviously, and that's not what we want to do, right? That's not efficient. That's not a way to search metadata. It was just looking for that unique ID. What you'll see in the documentation here is that Roberto uses this curl thing. All right. So what the heck is curl? And I believe it literally stands for command line URL, right? Is the C for command? What this allows us to, you can see I was just playing with it here. So let me clear this and make this a bit bigger. What I'm going to do here, oh, there it is. Okay. Like that. All right. What I'm going to do here is just copy and paste what Roberto's showing us here. Boom. And so what curl is it's a way to get information from an HTTP server on the command line. Okay. And so we can test out what the response would be right here so that we can better, prepare to look for it. Okay, sorry, I'm zooming. Is this big enough on my screen? Okay. And then if I change the number here, right, I can see the transaction that we referenced last week. Okay, but there's other things we can do with this. So let's just play around. One of the things suggested in the documentation here is just to query available metadatums. Let's see what that does. Okay. Now this result right here, this is an array of objects, right? I see the square brackets that represent an array. Inside the square brackets are these comma separated items. Each of these items is in curly brackets, representing that it's a JavaScript object, okay? And all this is saying is, look, here is a list of all of the metadata keys that have been used so far on the Cardano blockchain. And the reason this makes me laugh a little bit is, someday, really soon, this list is going to be epic. It's not going to fit on one screen, right? And you can look at, a key can be, how many digits is this? 4, 8, 16 digits, okay? So what you can see is that there are trillions of metadata keys available on Cardano. And so far, we've only used, a number that I could count right now. Okay. So this is just one of those representations of how early we are right now, and how much room there is for this blockchain to grow. And I hope that we're all laughing about this someday when we make the same query and it breaks my computer. Okay. Now, if you go to like this, the blockchain intelligence site at Stakepool Intelligence, I'll pull that up in a second. These are exactly the same list of keys you'll see represented on that page. One question.
Yes, this array is a percentage. Can you tell me about that?
Say that again.
That the array represents a percentage. So percentage is a. Oh, okay. That after the brackets, the square brackets, I see that it has the percentage.
Oh, the percentage.
Sign.
Yeah, that's just my command line prompt. No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that's showing up there. Let me
Got
see
it.
if it happens again. Yeah, that's just a symbol, I guess, to show that it's done. Yeah, it's returning everything inside the square brackets.
Okay, great.
Now I could actually grab this and I could map this directly, right? So let's just take a look at how it might have worked to build. Let's go to blockchain intelligence. There. Okay, so this website, I've featured these guys in a starter kit previously. If I look at the number of metadata keys, you can see there's 38 of them. And on this page, you can see key 0, key 1, key 2, key 3, key 4, and so on. And it's the same exact list of keys that we are seeing in my terminal window right here. Okay, so I want to just show an example of how they might have done this, right? Let's make this query in the app that we're building right now. So instead of querying TX metadata and looking for a certain ID, I'm just going to grab this URL right here. And I'm going to paste that in right here. Now, this is going to break my program. Okay, let me see. If I save this, I think it's not going to compile, but let me see. Oh, it did compile. Okay. But what shows up on the page? Okay. It says loading and then it just gets nothing, right? Because it's not a good request. And the reason it's not a good request, right, yeah, I'm using use effect. So the rest of the page loads and then it tries to make this request and it doesn't work. Part of the reason this doesn't work is that the place I'm storing it, which is a use state hook called some data, was initialized here to be a string. Okay, So when you begin to use a React hook, you have to say at the beginning what the data type is. So if I typed a 0 in here, now some data would be an integer, right? Last week I used the quotes, that made it a string. But as I saw on my command line, this query doesn't return a string or an integer. It returns an array. So what I want some data to be is an empty array when it opens up. So far, so good. All right. So if I make this request correctly, it's going to return an array that has all this data in it. Okay. And if that works, what I should be able to do, I'm just going to take this line right here and come back to it. So one thing I can do, if there's like lines of code that I want to save for later, I can go to the bottom of the file, make a comment, and just place them here. Let me just see what shows up. Let's make this just a paragraph. And let's make this some data. Whoops, that needs to be in curly brackets. The first element in the array. My goal is to have this render something. Did it work? No, it didn't. Okay, so we have to now think about why. Okay. Well, where I set some data right here, we were actually digging into an array. So line 13 is a critical line. I have to know the format of what's being returned here. And here's what I mean by that. I'm going to go back to the command line and look at the previous request we made, right? So previously, we were being given an array that had one object in it, and then we were looking for the ID of that object, okay? So it still was an array. That's why we called on element 0 here, right? The first element in the array that's returned. And then we grabbed the JSON from there, right? We looked for this key, JSON, and then we took what was in it and returned that. Obviously, when we make this request, the shape of what's returned here is very different from what's returned up here, right? So now I certainly don't want to look for the JSON field. What happens if I just take the first element in what's returned here? Let's see what that looks like. Okay, at least it's letting my page load. Let me see. It looks like I'm grabbing the first element here, but then I'm also trying to grab the first element here again. What if I just return whatever some data is? What's that going to be? All right, look, I broke it completely. Okay. And this is normal. We have to kind of go through and say, hey, what errors are we getting? So now this tells me that objects are not valid as React children. You're guaranteed to encounter this error on a regular basis when you start trying to pass data around, okay? So I just wanted you to see this is normal. So let's see. Okay, so it is getting an object, but I'm not allowed to pass that as a React child. So let's go back here again. What does this look like? What if I just call on this key right here, metadatum, right? What would that do? Some data dot metadatum. What it say? Oh, it's lowercase d. All right, so that needs to be lowercase. What if I do this? Go back. You see right here, now I have the number 0 rendering. Okay. So I had to do a little bit of digging here, and I'm sorry about the formatting here. This is probably hard to see. But you can see right here, this 0 at the bottom. Let's color it. Why not? Tell you guys a rule and then break it immediately, right? Let's just color this red so it's easy to see it, and forget about using paragraphs. Let's make it bigger so it shows up. Okay, there's our big red 0. And if I, instead of typing 0, if I type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, if I type 13, right, or this is probably index 14, I should get a 42. So I was just looking for the first one that's not mapped directly. So what happens if I change this 0 right here to a 14? It should make the number 42 show up on the page. Oh, 44, I was off by 1. 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All right, 13, 14. Okay, so the 14th index is 44. If I change that, I guess, to a 13, sure enough, it's a 42. Okay. Can you see right now how we are just one short step from essentially rendering all these keys just like they did on Stakepool Central, right? So let's see what that would look like. Maybe I want to style it like they did, right? So I have this variable here inside the curly brackets. I can just write the word key and then a colon here. And so now that looks a little bit better, right? Because I've labeled that number. And then let's do exactly what we did for this list right here and just map all of them, okay? So I'm going to go back to the logic from last week. Right now that I've separated concerns, it's easy for me to find the file where that was. Notice that this little 16-line file, it fits on my screen, so it's easy for me to read and remember the important parts. And what I'm trying to do here is I want to use this map, this array mapping feature, just like last week. So that's what I'm going to do, okay? I'm once again going to make an ordered list. Actually, let's not even make it an ordered list. Let's just make a bunch of headers, okay? And I want to use this map. So let's see if we can do that. I want to, what am I mapping? Whoops. So inside curly brackets, because there's logic here. Sometimes I just like copying and pasting from myself. So that's what I'm going to do to save time. And then I'm just going to change these pieces one by one. So I'm not mapping ideas.idea. I'm just mapping some data now. Some data is a simple array. And I can still use the letter I, okay? This letter I just stands for index. It could be whatever I want, okay? You know, it could be puppy and we'd be fine, right? As long as I change, and you know what? So yeah, let's just make it meaningful. Let's call this datum, and I'll change this one to datum, and I'll change this one to datum, okay? Again, there's no specific words here. It's just that this is internal to this little mapping call, what I'm calling it. Now, what am I mapping? Well, this is where I'm going to cut and paste from here. I'm not making list items anymore. I want to make red colored headlines. So let's do that first. I no longer need this key here, although I could keep it. And then H1 here. And then what are we posting? We want datum, right? Dot metadatum, right? Because that's the key whose information we then want to print. And then, and then I want to put the word key out in front of that. So it's going to be red. I'm mapping for each datum. I'm printing a headline that's red. And what's going to be printed there? The word key, and then the number of that metadatum. Let's get rid of this. Let's see if that map works. Okay. Some data.map is not a function. Some data. Look, what up here? Oh, wait, this is actually really good. I'm glad I missed this. Up here, I chose to grab only the index 13. Okay. And what that meant is that what I passed from line 13 down to line 22 was just a single integer, right? It wasn't the whole array. So in order to make this map function work, I want to pass the whole array, not just one element of it. So by deleting this 13 right here, that should solve my problem. Let's see if that works. Yeah, perfect. Okay. And so what we've done here is we've just built a really ugly copy of what they built here, right? But now that the data is on the page, styling it is a separate concern, right? And so referencing what we talked about last week, right? When you're on a team, somebody might be in charge of the styling and somebody else might be in charge of all the logic, okay? And we've just taken care of the logic part. And because we've separated our concerns so successfully, all I have to say to my colleague is, hey, go look at metadata call and go make that look prettier, right? And that's really exciting. You can see there's a lot of efficiency there when we begin to separate concerns like that. Questions about all that stuff?
Hey James, in the sum data use state up there, you specified an array as an output. Do you still have to map that?
Good question. Okay, you know what? Let's look. No, so map is only used if I have an array and I want to print all of its contents, okay, right? And style them some way. What would this thing do? Now you've got me curious. I'm going to grab this line right here. And I'm going to bring it down here. And instead, what if we just make a paragraph with some data in it? It's not going to do. Broke it. Okay, because some data is an array, which counts as an object in React. Yeah, there's one thing you might want to look up. There is a stringify JSON command in JavaScript that takes an object and just turns it into a text string. Okay. I'm not going to take the time to do that right now, but that's something to look up. And I believe that if we did that, that would just make an array that looks more like, that looks more like this maybe show up on the screen. Okay. Because, yeah, if I just did some data, what if I did this? Meta data. I'm pretty sure this won't work. At least it doesn't break it anymore. Yeah, but that's all that's saying is, yeah, you can't call it. It doesn't know which index to look for right here. So obviously, if I add a 13 here again and save that, Now the number 42 shows up again just fine.
Gotcha.
But yeah, the map is the key thing. And map, like this is one of the most common things you're ever going to do when you're building a web app, right? Because so much of the web is an unspecified, a data set of unspecified length that needs to be rendered to a page, right? Every social network is this, right? It's every Twitter, right? Is just all it is a map of tweets that there's all sorts of different logic for for which data to serve up to somebody. But once that data is served up, a tweet itself has its own styling and is just an individual object. And you can map, you map to reuse that over and over again. Can I do one more thing?
Yeah.
Let me see if this works. Actually, no, that's not going to work. Never mind. Okay, what I was just thinking about in my head is, look, the other thing they have are these numbers here, right? The quantity of transactions that use that metadata key, okay? And this relies on a totally separate API call. This would take us back to this one, the TX metadata one that we used last week. Okay. So basically, right. So no, that's ID though. Watch this just really quickly. What I can do is instead of typing ID is equal to 2806, I can say, what about querying all the ones where the key is equal to, the key here is 1337. So let me use that one. The key is equal to 1337. That's going to show me a whole bunch of different metadata transactions. Let me just zoom out a little bit. The details of this are not important, but you can just see all of this, all these different posts, right? And so 2806, if I scroll down here, oh, sorry, nope. Sorry, the key was 1337. 1337 has 12 transactions connected to it. If I change that number to a 700, I should only see 3 things. Let's try that. So instead of 1337, let's do 700. And look, here's 3 transactions that just have a little bit of metadata on them. And this takes us back to where we started. Look, here's Lyft playing around with metadata. So this is Kyle poking around, okay? And you can just see he was trying a few things here, okay? But I'm not going to do this, but just to talk through it, if I did want to find these quantities of transactions using each of these keys, what I would need to do is make a call to TX metadata for each of the ones that are returned here, right? For each of the 38 items in the list that I get by making this call, I would then take each of those numbers, put it as a variable into a call to the TX metadata endpoint. And then I would just look at the length of the arrays that are returned by each of those. Okay. And I think I can type. Can I type it? I forget if this works. Oh, never mind. All right. Cool. I think that's a good spot to pause. What do you guys think?
I think it's perfect. I think it's a perfect mix of, what you're really allowing us to do is, run with it ourselves in the areas that we're interested in, and you're kind of teaching us how to set our goals in a way. You know, it's not, you don't have to go through every little thing to understand what you do and don't like. But you're given a great mix between how it all comes together and, you know, the additional stuff that we can dig deeper into. So I think it's perfect.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was super interesting kind of to see how the platform worked and how it kind of, how to create and use the platform. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for being here tonight.
Yeah, of course.
And so one thing we haven't done is hosted any data, right, via an API call. All we've done is we've passively taken it down. So that's obviously a major part of interactive design is being able for the user to input things. And so actually, you know what? This query I was showing you at the end via the